Hey, what's up? Greetings. Welcome back to Black Bear News, where everything is connected and the viewers are smarter than the average bear. Yes, my face is really swollen because I'm taking antibiotics for a tooth that has gotten infected. And I'm going to go see the dentist tomorrow. All right. But we're going to start it off and get into it. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Thanks for being here. We're live on Rockfin, Rumble, and on YouTube. So check in, say hello from wherever you are. Caleb's over on Rockfin. All right. Here we go. Let's get into it. Max Wilbert and Extra Bola, Max, Malcolm over on YouTube. Fellas, how you doing? Max Wilbert kind of did a cool blast from the past post about the Battle of Seattle when there was a huge protest around the meeting of the World Trade Organization. So let's look at this. On November 30th, 1999, more than 50,000 people gathered in Seattle to protest a meeting of the World Trade Organization, an international group dedicated to promoting economic growth. We were kind of talking about Earth First the other day. I think Malcolm was talking about it. The unions woke up. Yeah. Well, we were talking about Earth First. This was kind of back when lefties were still lefties. When lefties were anti-establishment. When, like, back in the day, yeah, it was a long time ago. Back in the day, you know, the left could see the fascism for what it was. And they could see the fascism even coming from the left, right? They could see it in the Democrats and the Republicans. At least it seems like they more so, right? I don't know. There just seemed to be the culture and the understanding was like the guys on top are not our friends. The people, in charge are all in on on keeping us down, right? And in somewhere, I guess it started with Bill Clinton, but it took a little while for it to really mature. I think it started with Bill Clinton, then solidified with Barack Obama. That somehow, I don't know, the left are cool. I don't know. Not the left, the Democrats are cool. The left is always cool. The Democrats are cool and they care about you. Maybe it even started with Jimmy Carter, but I don't think so. It might have started with Jimmy Carter. Somehow the Democrats are cool and they care about you. And then over time, over the last few decades, it's actually not necessarily people on the right, but people who are willing to look at things from both sides are the ones that are questioning the powers that be, on both sides. And for whatever reason, they tend to kind of lean towards the right, or maybe more libertarian. I don't know. I've seen a few people out there, few comments going like, "Huh, seems like the right has become more anti-establishment than the left. How did that happen?" I don't know. I really don't know how it happened, because that's actually a bad sign. That's a bad sign for us. When the right are carrying the torch of anti-establishment, it's a bad sign. Because the right still think that like capitalism and, or unfettered capitalism or a totally free economic terrain is going to be, helpful for people. I don't know. But before we had, some kind of social, which we actually have now. We have a bit of a social democracy, right? They're anti-establishment until you start talking about Israel. Yeah, well, that's true. And also when you start talking about economics, they just don't, it's like, well, they're historically ignorant. They just don't remember the fact that there was a Gilded Age or an age when there was slavery. And that's how the economy was so good. Apparently so good, right? There was an age when the capitalists were just ran amok. What's the Upton Sinclair book? The Jungle? It's a great book. Read that book. That's the reality of like what was going on. And it's so weird because I hear now, it's so confusing because you have people kind of leaning right who are the anti-war, anti-establishment voices, but they're like, well, we should, let private companies take over, policing or fire department or security. Oh, really? Should we? Are you sure about that? Shani says the tech bros have hijacked the Republican Party. They don't want regulations. That's all. Yeah, well, yeah, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But we still have shreds of a democratically socialist country. We still have some remnants of that, and people actually like that. It's just the regulators don't regulate anymore. They're all bought off. And nobody seems to feel like they want to push the politicians to do the right thing. I mean, maybe we never could, but it seemed like there was a time when, yes, right? When unions were strong and people made good money and they had health care and college was cheap, when the government used to give you things like college and libraries and, right? When they thought that was good for society, then the right wingers really took over, and they're like, well, we can't have a bunch of educated people running around. They might question what we're doing. like being in endless wars. And then those same right-wing think tankers took over the Democratic Party. And now they've got you fully convinced that the Democratic Party cares about you. And that somehow the Republican Party is the party of of freedom, but it's freedom for capitalists. It's freedom for capitalists, not for you. It's freedom for capitalism, not for you. Anyways, let's read a little bit about this from Max Wilbert. We'll go back. The 1999 WTO uprising and the anti-war movement of the early to mid-2000s marked a radical turning point in my political philosophy, one which is becoming increasingly relevant today to young climate activists and environmentalists confronting stonewalling governments and grappling with the greenwashing lies they've been fed by NGOs and techno-utopians. Remember the climate justice people. This piece is a reflection on the lessons learned from the protest and what has changed since. Let's read this from Max Wilbert. I didn't even check how long this was. We'll see if we make it through. On November 30th, 1999, more than 50,000 people gathered in Seattle to protest a meeting of the World Trade Organization. You guys can't see this. An international group dedicated to promoting economic growth. What happened next would be immortalized as the Battle of Seattle. Protesters swarmed the downtown area, blocking roads and acts of civil disobedience and forming a human chain to stop delegates and corporate representatives from accessing the convention center where the WTO meeting was being held. Meanwhile, more radical groups smashed windows of businesses, most famously targeting Nike over their sweatshop labor practices, and caused $20 million in damage. In response, the mayor and governor mobilized thousands of police and National Guard, who shot tear gas, stun grenades, and pepper spray into the crowd and arrested more than 500 people, about a quarter of whom were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The motivations behind the WTO protests were as diverse but interlinked as the groups which participated. Organized labor and human rights activists saw the meeting as a power grab, aiming to open national borders to the flow of corporations while restricting worker movement. This, they argued, would lead to twin disasters: offshoring jobs from wealthy nations and leaving workers penniless here. And it was already underway. That was already underway. It wasn't even a coming problem. It was already a problem that was happening. While creating new markets for cheap labor in poor countries with low wages and practically non-existent labor protection laws. Environmentalists saw the meeting as an oligarch summit to organize efficient and rapid extraction of resources from the environment. In other words, to turn a living planet into dead commodities and into profit as quickly as possible. That also absolutely happened, with no constraint whatsoever. In fact, it ramped up after 2000, and George Bush came into office. They argued that corporate-friendly neoliberal trade policies would decimate environmental protection worldwide, facilitate ever greater externalization of costs in the form of pollution in ecological sacrifice zones. That also absolutely happened, and is still happening, by the way. Ain't no climate justice. Ain't no climate justice. That's just a nice word to say. Phrase, whatever you want to call it. Students, faith groups, indigenous communities, and racial justice organizations also saw the WTO and their brother organizations, the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, as being instruments of a violent form of economic neocolonialism. While the protests in November 1999 were successful at shutting down the WTO summit, the neoliberal agenda of so-called free trade has been the dominant economic paradigm for most of the intervening years. Since 1999, the size of the global economy has more than doubled from 55 trillion to nearly 120 trillion. But contrary to what you might think, this hasn't effectively reduced poverty, and the vast majority of this explosion in wealth has gone to the rich. On the ecological front, the neoliberal project of free trade, globalization, and deregulation has skyrocketed an already destructive system into the stratosphere. Annual greenhouse gas pollution has increased from 25 billion tons in 1999 to 37 billion tons in 2022. In 1999, humans used about 120,000 terawatt hours of energy, but by 2022 that had increased to 179,000 terawatt hours, nearly a 50% jump to meet that demand. Fossil fuels and biomass, cutting down trees and burning them, accounted for nearly 80% of the new energy production in this period. Plastic production has more than doubled since 1999, and in total, more than 2/3 of all plastic ever created has been pumped out of factories in the years since. Global population increased from 6 to 8 billion, and the abundance of wildlife plummeted an average of 18% between 1999 and 2018 when measured against an already seriously diminished 1970 baseline. And I would counter that a lot of the insect decline we saw was after that time, not before, but after. Almost a quarter century later, the goals and messages behind the WTO protest have been proven correct. Corporate globalization has been a disaster for workers, the poor, and the planet. Wealth inequality has increased in almost all parts of the world, including strikingly inside the United States. Meanwhile, in poor nations like Mexico and Bangladesh, sweatshops that often amount to virtual slave labor have proliferated, and the dismantling of tariffs and trade restrictions in favor of neoliberal free trade policies has destroyed domestic markets such as traditional organic farming. The WTO protests also marked a turning point in police tactics. Since the civil rights movement, police had taken a hands-off approach to policing protests via a strategy of negotiated management, recognizing that repression would often backfire. But the leaderless structure and radical intransigence of protesters in the Battle of Seattle meant that there was no one to negotiate with, a situation that has become normal for mass protests as strategic planning and coordination has become passé. In response, U.S. police agencies have taken counterinsurgency-based approach to mass protests in the 21st century, with heavily armed riot police, sound cannons, tear gas, and armored vehicles being typical. Empires often end up using techniques they originally perfected, putting down rebellions in their overseas colonies against their own people. I grew up in Seattle and I was 11 years old on November 30th, 1999, so I didn't participate in the protests, although my dad and sister did, but I came of age politically in the years afterwards and learned many lessons from Seattle. First, I learned about the danger represented by rampant industrialization and profit-driven corporate agendas in the new era of greenwashing and the return of superpower conflicts. The critical lens is incredibly important. Second, I learned about the systemic linkages between different social and environmental issues. The cross-movement and internationalist alliances built to oppose the WTO gave the movement strength and represents an important strategic model for activists and community organizers in the future. And third, I learned about the effectiveness of increasing collaboration between governments, corporations, and security forces to advance and protect imperialist growth agendas. That lesson would be driven home a few years later when I marched through Seattle on February 15th, 2003 to oppose the invasion of Iraq in the largest day of mass protest in world history. 50,000 people gathered in Seattle that day and as many as 10 million globally, but our voices were ignored. They don't care. They don't care what you have to say. All right, got some people watching on Rumble. That's cool. Um, the 1999 WTO uprising and the anti-war movement of the early to mid 2000s marked a radical turning point in my political philosophy, one which is becoming increasingly relevant today to young climate activists and environmentalists confronting stonewalling governments and grappling with the greenwashing lies they've been fed by big NGOs and techno-utopians. I used to believe that our democracy was broken, but these events helped me to realize that it was functioning quite well indeed. As founding father and constitutional architect James Madison once said, the primary function of government is to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. If this is true, and all evidence points towards it being so in this country, then organized political resistance, not the pipe dream of top-down institutional change, is our only hope for a better future. As my friend, the poet Dominique Christina said, revolution is the sound of your heart still beating. And as long as it is, you have work to do. Do it. Without apology, do it. Bravely and nobly, do it. Exist, insist, and by all means, resist. Good stuff from Max Wilbur. And I especially like the end of it, the end part of that. Because as I say often, they are not going to change themselves. You are not going to ask them to change. They are not going to heed your wishes. They're not going to hear you, listen to you, care about you. You are going to have to, what's the quote? Put your bodies against the gears. That's it. That's the only way it happens. You put your bodies against the gears. They are not going to give you an inch. Not by asking. And we see that the destruction is still going on, and the financial shenanigans are still going on. From Mike Udema, the fossil fuel industry gets $11 million in subsidies every single minute. Every single minute. And this is true. This is absolutely true. Again, when they say things like climate justice or we must take action. When the people in charge say that stuff, they're really, really not talking about taking action, because they're not going to stop stuff like this. They profit from stuff like this. And they also know full well that the end of, that to actually do anything about climate change means the end of the economy as we know it. Right. The economy and a healthy climate are diametrically opposed to each other. There's no way that you can, the economy we have now, there is no way you can have both. So one of them has to go. And guess what? Both of them will go. Eventually. If we don't destroy the economy as we know it, or destroy how it's organized, then the biosphere will go, and then the economy will go too. Those are the choices we have. That's it. That's all you got. Fossil fuel industry gets subsidies of $11 million a minute. IMF fines trillions of dollars a year, adding to fuel to the fire of climate crisis, experts say. Yeah, well, they're saying this and they're showing you this, but they're not opposed to this. They want this to continue. This is not. They're just telling you this because they're trying to get you to think that they give a shit. The IMF found the production and burning of coal, oil, and gas was subsidized by $5.9 trillion in 2020, with not a single country pricing all its fuels sufficiently to reflect their full supply and environmental costs. Well, experts said the subsidies were adding fuel to the fire of the climate crisis at a time when rapid reductions in carbon emissions were urgently needed. Explicit subsidies that cut fuel prices accounted for 8% of the total, and tax breaks another 6%. The biggest factors were failing to make polluters pay for the deaths and poor health caused by air pollution, 42%, and for the heat waves and other impacts of global heating, 29%. Setting fossil fuel prices that reflect their true costs would cut global CO2 emissions by over a third, the IMF analyst said. This would be a big step towards meeting the internationally agreed 1.5C target. Keeping this target within reach is a key goal of the UN COP. Anyways, blah, blah, blah. What they don't tell you is that if you take fossil fuels down by a third, well, you're going to take the global economy down by probably more than a third. So that's not going to happen. That's why that won't happen. That's why it's a disingenuous thing to say. Because they know nobody in charge is going to fight for that. Because they're not even telling you the truth about it, right? If they were going to fight for it, they would tell you. I don't even know if RFK Jr. is telling you the truth about that. I'm not quite sure. I don't know. I listened to Nicole Shanahan, his VP pick. She seemed like she kind of understood. I sound like Greta Thunberg. It seemed like RFK Jr.'s VP pick kind of understood, in some ways, the math. But if somebody were to suggest that the global economy would have to shrink, I mean, even suggesting it shrink by a third would be monumentally head explosion producing. It would be, something that all the people in charge and all the people in the media would absolutely just lose their absolute shit over. What? The global economy has to shrink by a third? Never. Don't allow anybody to say that on national TV, ever let somebody say that. But it's not just a third. It needs to shrink by what? At least 2/3, if not more. I would imagine. If we're going to not destroy the planet anymore. That's about what it would be. But that would entail a lot of refiguring on how people live on this planet. And they don't want to do that. So I find this article to be disingenuous at best. Yeah, Malcolm. Yeah, most likely we'll end up in a robot patrolled dystopian hellscape. I'm sure. I mean, look at this bullshit from Brazil. They're echoing the The very limp-wristed, tepid little attempts. Remember the 2020 primary, the Democratic primary, when gasp, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren were calling for like a 1% tax or a 3% tax on the wealthy. That is nothing. That is nothing. During the height of FDR's administration and the New Deal era, the wealth tax was something, corporate tax was like 90%. 90%. But they're talking about 1 or 2%, and the wealthy are like, hell no, you'll never get it from us. And they won't. They will resist that 2% tax or 1% tax or whatever. They will resist it with every fiber of their being. They'll never let that happen. And they'll probably, if anybody gets close, they'll take them. They'll kill whoever gets even close to passing something like that. They'll just take them out. That's just how that's going to go. Anyways, this ridiculous stuff from Brazil. Brazil is proposing a global wealth tax of 2%. Global wealth tax of 2%. Wow, 2%. That would only affect about 100 billionaire families, but could raise $250 billion to tackle the climate crisis. Implementing this requires a lot of public pressure around the world. Oh, okay. And also implementing this requires that you live in fantasy land. I mean, it could happen, I guess. But the wealthy and the powerful, they got a lot of power. They got a lot of wealth. And they will never, ever, ever let anything close to this ever happen. And the fact that a politician is proposing it is even more laughable. Like, now, if there was a grassroots, people-powered, from the bottom up coalition of the people of the planet, something, saying like, we demand that the wealthy get taxed, and they're in front of every Congress in every nation of the world, rattling the gates. We demand that. Then maybe, but a politician proposing? Hell no. No, that's not going to happen. Morally, nobody's against it. Brazil's radical plan to tax global super rich to tackle the climate crisis. Where is my laugh track? It's here somewhere. Proposals to slap a wealth tax on the world's super rich could yield $250 billion a year to tackle the climate crisis and address poverty and inequality, but would affect only a small number of billionaire families, Brazil's climate chief has said. Ministers from the G20 group of the world's biggest developed and emerging economies are meeting in Rio de Janeiro this weekend. What? Where Brazil's proposal for a 2% wealth tax on those with assets worth more than $1 billion is near the top of the agenda. Wow. No government was speaking out against the tax, said Ana Tony, who is National Secretary for Climate Change in the government of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Our feeling is that morally nobody's against it, she's told The Observer in an interview, but the level of support from some countries is bigger than others. Okay. However, the lack of overt opposition does not mean the tax proposal is likely to be approved. It will not be approved. Many governments are privately skeptical, but unwilling to publicly criticize a plan that would shave a tiny amount from the rapidly accumulating wealth of the planet's richest few and raise money to address the pressing global climate emergency. Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, told journalists in Rio that the U.S. did not see the need for a global initiative. The U.S. is like, nope, nope, nope. And if the U.S. is nope, then it ain't going to happen. The U.S. did not see the need for a global initiative. Of course, they didn't. People are not keen on global taxes, Tony admitted, and there is a question over how you implement global taxes. But she said levying and raising a tax globally was possible, as has been shown by G7 finance ministers agreeing to levy a minimum 15% corporate tax. It should be at a global level because otherwise, obviously, rich people will move from one country to another, she said. Only about 100 families around the world would be affected by the proposed 2% levy, she added. The world's richest 1% have added $42 trillion to their wealth in the past decade, roughly 36 times more than the bottom half of the world's population did. How about that old trickle-down economic theories? How's that working out? The question of how funds raised by such taxation should be spent had also not been settled, noted Tony. Some economists have argued that the idea was more likely to be accepted if the proceeds were devoted to solving the climate crisis than if they were used to address global inequality. Because we don't care about that. Other experts say at least some of the money should be used for poverty alleviation. Just a little bit? Can we get $1 billion? Can we get a couple $1 billion? Tony was in London last Friday for a meeting convened by Energy Secretary Ed Miliband of the hosts of the next two UN climate summits, Brazil and Azerbaijan. Brazil will host the COP30 conference in the Amazonian city of Belém next year, while COP26 will run for 2 weeks this November in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. Yeah. Well, I hope they get it figured out. I hope they fix that climate change. Man, that'd be cool. That'd be really cool if they fixed climate change. Man. Can't wait. COP30, here we go. No, COP29. Let's go. Let's go. COP29. Let's go. There's a new article up on my Patreon page if y'all want to check it out. I read it this morning on the 11 a.m. Thoughts. If you want to go check it out. Also, if you like this show, coming to you for free 99, 5 days a week and such, a couple times a day or sometimes on the weekends or all kinds of different times. If you like what you see and you hear here and you want to support, that would be really great. There are links in the description box, Venmo, PayPal, coffees, etc., Cash Apps, ways to support the show. And to the people that support the show already, I appreciate you. You know who you are. All right. Antarctic heat wave. I forgot to talk about this the other day. Antarctic heat wave. Temperatures. This is from a few days ago. No, yesterday. Temperatures are some 24 C above average in northern Antarctica at the moment, and what should be the height of winter. So Antarctica is doing what the Arctic is doing. 24 C above average. That's the clue. That's the key there. It should be much, much colder in these red areas, yes? Yes. Let's see. Heavy hail in Russia. One of the places that's on the extreme weather whack-a-mole list today. A few days ago, torrential downpours caused flash flooding at Dolly Parton's Dollywood in Tennessee. And I think some people got injured. That's some heavy hail. Look at that. One minor injury was reported. A local road at the park's entrance collapsed as a result of the rain. This is flooding at Dollywood. Oh, can't see it. Can you see it? Can't see it. Here we go. At least 89 people were killed and dozens more feared trapped after relentless rain triggered a series of landslides in Kerala's Wayanad. Wayanad. It's in India. If you didn't know. Holy shnikes. Wrecked. China also just continuing to get obliterated by heavy rains, heavy weather. They're on the front lines of climate payback. China is. But eventually nature is gonna demand payment from all of us. Oh, what's up? Tor Werner. Thank you, Tor. I appreciate it. Tor gave me a tip on Rockfin. $20, 20 smackers. Thanks, Tor. Appreciate you, man. You rock. Denver says methane is filling the atmosphere and the Earth is becoming Venus over the next 1,000 years or so. You're with COP29. Let's go. COP29, Cop Kamala. I'm with all the cops. You know what I'm saying? I stand with the cops. Aram says, what? Oh, yes. Drug testing. Yeah, sharks have cocaine in them. Why they were testing sharks for cocaine, I don't know. Yep. Yeah, China is really getting whacked. Really getting whacked. All right. Oh, here it is. This is from yesterday. I couldn't quite get to. I've listened to Kevin Blanche before, Delene. Of course I have. Of course I have. Let's see. The Yalu River, the border between China and North Korea, has experienced a record flood with a flow rate approaching 30,000 cubic meters per second. In this video shot in Dandong, China, the North Korean side has been completely submerged. See if we can get these. All right, guys, I'm going to sign off now because I have got to get on my merry way and go take care of some things. And thanks for checking in, or thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being here. Thanks, everyone. Let me see if I have anybody else to thank in the tip department. I don't know. Not sure. I think that's it. Thanks, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. What is tomorrow? Tomorrow's Wednesday. Brain Fallout tomorrow, 4 p.m. I'll see you guys tomorrow at 4 on Rumble and Rockfin for Brain Fallout. Thanks for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience, and especially thanks for the conversation. Until next time, peace. Oh, thanks, George. While I'm here. Thanks, Tor, for the other. Tor tipped me another $20 on Rockman. Thanks, Tor. Appreciate you, brother. Very generous.